get asked about podcast show notes all the time. It's like one of those things that people always want to talk about whenever they are, just bringing up podcasting to me. They either want to talk about how much show notes stress them out, how much they hate doing them, or they just don't do them all together. So today I wanted to share with you 4 ways to make your podcast show notes better. So let's get right to it. Hey y'all, Crystal here today, and if you are brand new to me in this channel, hello and welcome. We are so happy that you're hanging out here with us in our little corner of the internet. But I'm Crystal Proffitt. I teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. And like I said in the beginning, today we are talking about 4 easy ways to make your podcast show notes better. I mean, it's one of those things that people really get freaked out about. Am I doing enough in my show notes? Should I be doing more? And I think a lot of that comes from comparison, right? Like, we do this a lot, especially as podcasters. We look at someone who's been doing this for a decade and we say, why aren't my show notes as good as theirs? Or I feel like they go above and beyond. And here's just the simple truth. A lot of these podcasters, the big shot ones, the big name ones, they usually have a whole team of people behind them, right? Maybe they have one person that is totally dedicated to creating graphics and images, maybe another person to do their transcript, maybe another person just for SEO and marketing and advertising. Like, there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes of these really big podcasters. So for those of us that are a little less well known, I want to tell you, you do have the opportunity to create amazing podcast show notes and keep it very simple for yourself. So whether you're a solopreneur doing this by yourself or you just have a virtual assistant, the tips that I'm going to share with you today are going to be super helpful. So let's dive right in. Tip number 1 to having better podcast show notes is, first and foremost, I want you to have a better title. Yes. Like, titles are so important, and I feel like it's one of those things that gets the leftovers of your attention, because so many people are so concentrating on okay, this is the topic I'm going to talk about. This is when I'm going to record. This is how I'm going to record. Then I'm going to edit, and then I'm going to do all these things. So by the time it actually gets to you uploading it to your podcast hosting service, you're like, what am I supposed to call this thing? So it ends up being an afterthought, and you're so tired, you're so just done with it at that point that you're just like, I'll just throw something out there, right? The title isn't that important. Yes, it is. If you're banking on getting some organic search through SEO, which is search engine optimization, or Google, or someone being interested in learning more about your podcast, you need to pay attention to the title. The titles matter a lot. So I actually want you to go check out this podcast episode right here that is all about SEO for podcast. This is done on the Proffitt Podcast, and we've talked about SEO is something we always continuously revisit over and over again. And I'm actually going to link to another episode where we talk about how do you title your podcast episodes, because it is that important for you to understand this stuff. Okay, so first and foremost, you have to have a great title of your episodes that you're going to use in your show notes, so people will want to know, well, what is this episode about? Is this something I need to listen to? Because if you just throw up there a conversation with insert guest name here, people may not know who that is. Or maybe they do, but they're like, well, what is this conversation about? Is it worth my time? So that's tip number 1, create better titles. Tip number 2 for having better podcast show notes is to have an easy to remember URL. Okay, so this checks a few of the boxes for me, because personally, I'm not great at remembering my own URLs. Is that something, should I have said that? Should I have admitted that out loud? Oh my gosh, it happens all the time where I'm like, wait, where do I tell people to go find that? And whenever I started my podcast journey, I looked at other podcasters who were doing it well and whose show notes I actually went and looked at because they were really good and they were important to me as a listener to go and find the resources or go look at whatever they were sharing in their show notes. And I only remembered those because they were very easy to remember. So if you have a website, like a WordPress site, where you can change all of your posts, right? Because essentially your show notes are a blog post and you can change the permalink, right? Like this is like, stay with me for a second, okay? You know what I'm talking about here, right? So it's the permalink. This is where you're going to have the ability to change what is at the end. So for example, crystalproffitt.com/episode, whatever episode number that is. That is how I have formatted my podcast show notes. So you could go all the way back to crystalproffitt.com/episode 1 or crystalproffitt.com/episode 245 and whichever number you want to use. So I like the idea of keeping it very easy to remember so you remember to say it too. Like that's the key. Like so your audience can go find it, but you will remember to say it. Like if you are trying to remember your exact title, the exact way it's going to show up every time, and you're like, okay, I have to say it correctly because if I say it incorrectly on the podcast, and I have to go back and change it, and no one's going to find it, and then they're going to get a 404 error and say that this page doesn't exist, and they're going to think I'm a phony and all these other things. So I want you to have a very easy to remember URL for your podcast show notes. So I want you to tell me in the comments below, are you already doing show notes for your podcast? Or is this something that you're like, oh, that's further down the road for me. I'm thinking about it. Maybe I'll start soon. Tell me in the comments where you are in your journey of podcast show notes, because I'm really curious, because I think that this is a topic we need to talk about more, but I want to see where you stand in your podcast journey. So tell me in the comments below. Okay, let's get back to the video. The third tip that I have to share with you today about making your podcast show notes better is to add images and videos. Okay, I mean, I'm going to tell you just straight up, I'm not a fan of plain text posts. I think that they're boring. I think that you can really jazz things up by adding images, videos, maybe even extra audio clips. I don't know. There's so many really cool things that you can do with websites nowadays that I think that the sky is the limit, but the plain text, just blah, like we're done with those. I want you to add images, even if it's simply something that you already added on your social media post, or it was something related to what you talked about in your podcast episode, or there's a YouTube video that's so awesome out there that you found it and you're like, oh, this is exactly what inspired today's episode. Link to that in your show notes. But I think it's important to really jazz things up, because why would someone need to go from just listening in their ears to taking that next step, right? If your call to action is go check out the show notes, crystalproffitt.com/episode 245, what are they going to find there? Are they going to find tips? Are they going to find videos? Are they going to find extra resources? Which that is actually my tip number 4. The last one I have to share with you today is to have resources in your show notes. This is what's going to take someone from, oh yeah, she always talks about her show notes, but I don't really know what's there. It's like maybe whenever I have time, I'll go check it out. As opposed to, oh my gosh, she talked about this incredible resource that saved her $10,000. I'm going to run to the show notes and see what the heck it is that she's talking about. By the way, I don't think that I have a resource that saved me $10,000. Maybe? I don't know, but you get what I'm saying. It is something to get your people that are listening to your podcast to take action, because there's so many other cool things that you can do once someone's on your website. You can do some lead generation. You can have them book a discovery call. You can, work your magic in the email marketing space, but you have to get them from just being a passive listener of your podcast to actually taking action and getting their butt over to your website to look at your show notes. And then the possibilities are endless for all the cool things that you can do. But first, I want you to improve your podcast show notes. So I'm going to do a quick recap. I actually have my notes right here. So 1, better titles. This is first and foremost. 2, we are going to have an easy to remember URL, right? So your listeners can remember and you can remember. 3, we are gonna have awesome images and videos that are related to what you are talking about. So whether it's just a cover of a book that you read or something cool that you found online, I want you to have images and videos to spice things up a little bit. And then number 4, I want you to have resources. Y'all, you could link to your own stuff at this point. I know on my podcast show notes, I link to my Poddy Podcast Toolkit, which is one of the lowest price point products that we have because I want people to have access to that. I've linked to my book, Start a BINGE-WORTHY Podcast. I've linked to my course before. I've linked to so many different things because I want it to be an extra value add to my listeners. So those are the 4 tips that I have to share with you today to make your podcast show notes better. Again, I want you to comment below and tell me where you're at on your podcast show notes journey, or just tell me where you're at in your podcast journey. If you are brand new around here and you haven't already checked it out, make sure you check out our 4 Insider Secrets Masterclass. This is absolutely free. You're going to find a link here and in the description below, but I really want you to go check this out if you haven't already. If you're just getting started in your podcast journey, it's perfect for you. If you've been doing this for a while, but you're like, I don't know if I did this right, it's absolutely for you too. So that's all I have for you today. So make sure you hit that thumbs up on this video, subscribe below so you don't miss our future videos all about podcasting and running your online business. Make sure you check out these videos right here, all about podcasting and running your online business. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.